Arkansas farms and Arkansas factories, a new NAFTA and a new deal, or mostly a new name. A false alarm at one venue, an alarming surge at another. How secure can they be made to be? The late senator from Arizona and a state he carried easily. Some reflections. But first, with or without a federal check, where goes Arkansas agriculture from here? Arkansas Week, next.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. In just a few moments, our roundtable will kick around some of the top stories of the week, but we begin tonight with Arkansas's farm economy in suspense for months as the Trump administration battles governments on 3 continents over imports and exports. And as we go on the air, much is still up in the air, especially about the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. But it does appear that federal assistance to farmers damaged by retaliatory tariffs will be getting some assistance from Washington. How much, to whom, and will it be enough to offset the losses? Joining us are Randy Veach, president of the Arkansas Farm Bureau, and Dr. Mark Cochran, the UA's vice president for agriculture. And gentlemen, thanks very much for coming in. President Veach, we'll start with you. Apparently some checks are headed our way. Will there be enough?
Well, I think that we probably not necessarily be enough. We won't know for sure until the market plays out. But at this point right now, it's probably going to be a little short. Especially they're dividing up in 2 payments, 50% up front, and that's looks like it's coming from out of a statement from Sonny Perdue that the crops would have to be completely harvested.
The Agriculture Secretary.
Yeah, the Ag Secretary, that the crops would have to be completely harvested and then turn your yields in and sign up with FSA. They're administrating the program, and then you would get some money coming after go through that process. So it's going to be, in December or so, probably time all the crops are out. Maybe some farmers will get out earlier, and once they do, then they will turn all those yields in, and then we will see about some help. But 50% up front, and then see what the markets do later on into the 2019 and see where we're at there before we know whether to get the other 50%.
All right, Dr. Cochran.
Yeah, I think it's greatly appreciated. It's certainly a start off of it. It's a $12 billion program. As Randy indicated, they're going to be allocating about half of the money here in the short term off of it, with a second round possible with those decisions being made the first week in December. So it will help, but it's certainly not going to make everybody whole from this first round of payments off of it.
Ultimately, can it be compensatory for this year's crop?
A lot of dynamics and a lot of uncertainty about it. So the $12 billion is divided into 3 programs.
Is that a no, Dr. Cochran?
It's at this time it's unknown. So,
okay.
So the biggest portion of it is in what they call the market facilitation program. So they're targeting 5 row crops: soybeans, wheat, cotton, corn, and grain sorghum.
I think we've got a graphic that we can call up there. Yeah,
yes.
You can kind of walk us through that.
Yes. And so what you're seeing here is a total of $4.7 billion. There is a payment rate, and with this that you have to certify your actual production, your yields and your acreage off of it. And then 50% of that would be available for these rates off of it. So if you go through this, we're expecting that somewhere around $165 million would come out of this first round of payments. Our economist did some estimates that if these tariffs were in for an entire season, off of it. The losses to our row crop producers would be somewhere in the $400 to $500 million range, and a loss to the gross state product by the time you figure all the multiplier effects of somewhere between $600 and $800 million. So you can see that this is a start, but it's not going to make everybody whole from the first round, and we'll see what happens with the second round and how long the prices and the tariffs remain in effect.
Randy Veach, that's a big hole in the hole if that comes to pass.
Yeah, I think so. I think, also we're looking at like dairy, for instance. In Arkansas, dairy would average about $1,200 a dairy. Now, some would be more, some would be less. So you can see that $1,200 a dairy is not much support and protection. And of course, a lot of our row crop farmers and our farmers and ranchers both together, most of them have to borrow some money, operating loans, and we hear that also some of those loans are being relooked at right now, even before harvest is finished. And so we're going to be looking at only a half a payment to help mitigate this markets loss that we've had. And will that be enough for farmers to be able to make another production loan for 2019? And that's going to be happening, pretty quickly, right at harvest or right after harvest. They're going to start working on those. And so I can see that without any more support than this, and especially if we don't get, 100% of those payments, that we will and could lose some good farmers.
Well, you're looking at interest rates also. Certainly your members are.
Yes. Yeah, interest rates are up, and most all of our input costs are up. And then soybeans, take soybeans as an example, soybeans is about $2 below break-even price. And so where are we going to be, at the end of the time when the crops are out, we add it all up, we got some farmers, are they going to be able to continue for 2019? We don't know yet.
Yeah, if all three of us, if we're couching our phrases, if we're parsing our words carefully here, it's because at this hour and probably even later today, we don't know what we don't know. These talks are still underway. The Trump administration, Dr. Cochran, had set a Friday deadline for an agreement, and at this particular hour, it is the Canadians that seem to be balking.
The NAFTA agreement is obviously the three countries, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And why it's so important for agriculture is Canada is the largest receiver of ag exports from the United States. China is number 2, and Mexico is number 3. So we got 2 of the 3 big ones, and between those 3 countries, that accounts for about 2/3 of our total exports. So these 3 markets are extremely important to us. Most of the negotiations were done between the United States and Mexico to reach this agreement in principle. The Mexicans were conferring with the Canadians, so it wasn't like they were being brought in from the cold off of it. But there was expectations, and to meet the timetable to get through the 90-day notice that the President needs to have with the U.S. Congress in time for an agreement to be finalized before the Mexican presidency changes from the current president to the president-elect, that was what was driving it. There was some early optimism this week that we could make some concessions, but what's being heard this morning is that maybe Canada is not going to be on board with it. The other complication on that is that it's very clear that the President, through the fast-track negotiation laws, has authority to modernize NAFTA. There are questions whether or not he has authority to do a bilateral agreement. So if Canada is not part of it, where the process will go has some greater uncertainties associated.
Well, and as Dr. Cochran noted, the administration, not just on NAFTA, but in the Asian Pacific Basin as well, other trading partners, he's talked about effecting bilateral agreements, and that is a huge question mark. It leaves your members and Arkansas manufacturers, for that matter, sort of up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a lot of balls in the air right now, juggling a lot of those balls and trying to figure out on trade especially where we're going and where we're going to end up. And as Dr. Cochran has said, we got Canada, China, and Mexico, our 3 largest trading partners, especially when it comes to agriculture. And so we see that there's a lot of uncertainty in what the markets may be. Now, NAFTA with the trilateral agreement, and that's great, bilateral agreements with each country will be fine as well, Canada and Mexico, but we just need to get it done. We need to go one way or the other. We need to get this trade deal done. The way I understand it under TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, that the President, with his agreement with Mexico, and Dr. Cochran can weigh in on this, but is that he sends a letter to Congress and they approve that the deal is okay, and then we move forwards. But first I've heard what Dr. Cochran was talking about being a trilateral trade agreement now. Would the Trade Promotion Authority give him the authority to do that? I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that.
There's a real question about it, but let me, this is more a political question than an economic question. What ag and what manufacturing craves, it would appear, is some semblance of stability, and we have not had that in recent months. Do you see any prospect, Mr. Veach, of achieving that in the near term?
Well,
trade and tariffs are always shifting, but they're...
Yeah, they are, and you know we always have a lot. I mean, we have some. Hopefully that we'll get a control of some of those. We have some trade agreement violations too as well. And of course, we know that's what prompted everything that's going on with China right now, and they have been a bad player for a pretty good while. And we are now...
Even as they've been a huge customer.
Even as they've been a huge customer, that's exactly right. But they've also been a bad player, and yes, we all agree that we need to bring them in line, but this trade war that we're in right now is really affecting our bottom line. And, you know, we are down projected to be down another 13% in net farm income for this year. And with that on top of, since the last 10 years, you know, agriculture has continued to decline in net farm income. And so we're looking at low net farm income, and there's just a length of time that you can stand that every year and stay in business. And I'm telling you, it's a serious situation. If we don't get some help that helps take care of, mitigate the losses in the markets to these trade wars that we're in right now, and all these other trade agreements that are just up in the air, and we're not closing any of those, completely closing any of those where we can count on those, then we're going to see some issues when it comes to staying in business when it comes to 2019.
On the 1 to 10 optimistic, pessimistic scale, Dr. Cochran, where do you stand right now?
No, probably about a 6 or 7.
Is that optimism or pessimism?
It's the optimism off of it. You know, following up on what Randy said, that when we talk to our ag lenders, that oftentimes this rule of the 3 H's comes in with our row crops. That first H would be to harvest. The second is to hold. Traditionally, the lowest price in a given series is going to be at harvest time, and we've got depressed prices right now. We're getting lots of signals that from the basis that there's enough grain in New Orleans that they can't move right now. And then the third one is hope. And so how you weigh the harvest, hold, and hope into a stable framework is a real concern. What Randy's indicating, that the 3 of the last 4 years, particularly in 14, 15, and 16, 17 was a better year for us.
Right.
Most of our row crop people lost money. And so this year is going to be very critical. That agriculture is very capital intensive. One of the key components of the cost of production is the interest rate that's going to be paid on the operating loans that they have to have. So the lenders are looking very closely at the equity and the solvency of these farms. And there's another rule of thumb that you go 4 years with losses, that you're in a situation that you're looking at how much equity you have remaining in the operation and what's your ability to get an operating loan for the next year. So it's pretty serious, particularly if you look at that bottom 10 to 15% of our farmers as we work through this. A little different situation on our livestock side of the equation. But the other thing as an economist that worries us is that particularly with our row crops, where we're selling about half of what we're producing from Arkansas into the markets, is the strength of the dollar. Because the stronger the dollar gets, the more expensive it is for our countries, and gives an advantage to other sources that could be out there.
Gentlemen, we have to end it there because we're short of time. Thanks to both of you for coming in, and please come back soon.
Thank you for appreciating agriculture and know what it means to the economy of our state. Thank you, Steve.
Well, I eat. And we'll be right back. Back now with a couple of old pals, Wes Brown from Arkansas, talk business and politics, and Ernie Dumas, an independent journalist. We'll start with Wes because what is bad for maybe bad for Arkansas farms turns out to be pretty good for Arkansas foundries.
Yeah, the steel industry, because of the tariffs on international aluminum and steel imports to the United States from China, Mexico, Canada, and other nations, the Arkansas steel industry is booming. We've got Nucor has doubled its profits, which has a mill up in Blytheville area in Mississippi County. Also, Big River Steel announced a $1.2 billion expansion. They announced they've got a new credit line to continue expansion. And that area is just, they both are adding jobs in that area, and those jobs pay about $75,000 annually, blue-collar jobs. So the industry is booming directly in relationship to the tariffs that President Trump imposed on China.
So beneficial has it proved that one of those is now in play, apparently.
Yeah, Big River Steel is, and it's along the plan of the founder, John Correnti. He generally builds these big steel mills. Did one the first one back in the Bill Clinton era, and then he did one in Mississippi and did one in Birmingham, Alabama. He builds them, then turns around and sells them to his competitors, and he makes a lot of money. So this seems to be the kind of the same blueprint for the Big River Steel plant. The publicly traded companies like SDI, which is Steel Dynamics up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Nucor, which is out of North Carolina, are both said to be interested in buying this mill along with some investment groups. So
obviously, I guess it goes without saying that with that kind of expansion and with that kind of return on equity, they would seem to be secure. Certainly for the near term, but around the corner, I mean, you know, trade and tariffs shift.
Yeah, they shift, and the steel industry, you know, has been cyclical, just like more kind of like the energy industry. You see these great peaks and then these huge valleys. So like you said, around the corner, the industry could go down. And what you saw in the steel industry before this recent upswing, the industry was basically in a downturn.
Yeah.
So in a recession. So
a world glut of steel.
Yeah. And so we could see that same dynamic take place, and then all these plans for expansions and all these Nucor's profit, I think for the second quarter was like 700 million. So they're going to be doing great for a while, but you know, just like any industry, any sector, how long will it last?
Yeah. Ernie, it can't be surprising that the General Assembly has focused, again, never takes its focus off of it really, that's the Arkansas Department of Correction, but 5 inmate deaths in about 4 days and more than a dozen likely overdose cases. Mm-hmm. So the senior staff of ADC is going back before the legislature this coming week.
That's right. The legislature is, Senator Joyce Elliott asked her committee on, I guess it's penal and correctional institutions to look into these deaths. This is not Arkansas alone. Mississippi, I think, has had 12 or 13 or maybe 15 deaths in their prison system recently. And generally, I think, and across the country, it's a problem across the country.
Yeah.
And they trace it, we don't know for sure that that's the cause of the deaths in Arkansas, but a synthetic drug that kind of imitates the narcotic effects of marijuana is somehow getting into the prisons as contraband. And that's causing these, maybe causing these inmate deaths. I guess we'll find out when they do the autopsies and everything, whether that's the cause of these things. But it's a grave problem, and all of these deaths, or not all of them, but I think 4 of the 5 were in a maximum security, supermax, which is a very high security prison. So this contraband is getting into the prison. So it's a national problem, and we're seeing the effects of it here.
Yeah, it was emphasized to me how difficult it is to detect a substance like K2 has become kind of an umbrella term. It was also
for the synthetic.
in terms of these synthetics, but it is exceptionally difficult to detect these components when they enter any facility, let alone even a prison, high security prison.
Yeah, it's not like just regular marijuana. When it's going to come up on
not much bulk to
K2.
Right,
right. So yeah, it's very difficult, and also it's always the issue with prison systems. Is it is it an internal problem? Is the guards are the ones that are bringing in, or how is it getting in? That's the question that's always that the prison system has to solve. How is this contraband getting in, and then dealing with that particular situation?
Yeah, and a security issue of a different sort. There was a big scare at War Memorial Stadium. Everyone's read about it since like that. How do you make a stadium more secure, and particularly at a time when politically there's, even now in Arkansas, there's no appetite for firearms control?
No, there's not going to be appetite for arms control. If anything, the legislature may decide to require firearms, and if you're going to a game, you have to carry your gun with you or something. I'm joking about that, but it's this is not a new problem. It's just new to us. Back over the years, we read about these massive the kind of riots at soccer games in Europe, where there's panic and stampedes and dozens and people die and hundreds injured. And it's been, of course, exacerbated recently by the terrorist attacks, and then the mass shootings in Colorado and in Florida, the school shootings from the hotel in Colorado. So there's now just a kind of a panic mode. So anybody goes to a stadium where there's a lot of people and there's a sudden noise, then that's what happened out there. Obviously there was not really a big shooting underway or anything. Apparently there was
not a shot fired, evidently.
Well, except by a stun gun. Somebody took a stun gun there and fired a shot, but apparently some kids got into a fight, knocked over these barricades, which made, I guess, when it hit the concrete, made a loud noise. And somebody, I don't know what happened, but maybe somebody issued some scary call, and all of a sudden everybody floods out, leaves their kids and belongings behind. So it's so the State Parks Department, which controls now controls the stadium, War Memorial Stadium, has adopted some changes requiring, I think, that everybody who comes to a game at War Memorial Stadium will have to bring clear bags to carry their belongings in. And there'll be no loitering in the big hall down. I don't know how you enforce that, loitering in the big halls down where you go down and get your Cokes and hamburgers. And I've forgotten what the other part of it is, but just trying to tighten the controls a little bit so it won't be as free-wheeling as games normally are. So that's where we're headed. I guess we'll find the same thing at War Memorial, at Razorback Stadium in Fayetteville, and whether it spreads on down to high school games or not, but it's a scary thing.
John McCain ran for president twice. In 2000, he fell early on to George Bush, so it really wasn't a factor in Arkansas. 8 years later, Mr. McCain overcame the Huckabee surge, as you'll recall, and he was the Republican nominee. He carried Arkansas just under 60% in 2008, carrying 68 counties.
Yeah, he swept Arkansas. Was a very popular election for him in the South. He actually did very good in the South, but against President Obama. But and he's always had was to conservative. His conservative appeal in Arkansas and his maverick appeal in Arkansas has always been well received. And you're seeing that all the accolades are coming in now for right now as we speak for his funeral. And it's very it'll be interesting what Arizona do in selecting the the next choice to replace him. I think that's the big
Ernie,
question.
it does not diminish Mr. McCain or any of his accomplishments in any way to wonder if much of this week-long national memorial, all the events and all the ceremonies in recognition of Mr. McCain aren't in some degree a reaction against the now titular head of the Republican, or the head of the Republican Party.
Well, that's part of it, and there's also kind of a backlash on behalf of the Trump base, I guess you could call it, the 35 or 40% who are diehard Trump supporters no matter what he does. So there's some friction there in the way the president handled this whole thing. I think set badly with nearly everybody, but it's not going to diminish his popularity much. Do we have time to tell a David Pryor story?
Quick.
Okay. John McCain was a very complicated person, and his record was kind of mixed. Sometimes he was a true party man up and down the line. Other times he bucked the party and joined up with Democrats. But he started off, one of the low point in his life, I think, was when the Keating 5 scandal came along. You remember the savings and loan scandal in the 1980s, when so much of the savings and loan industries across the country crashed. And so there was a scandal involving Senator McCain and 4 other U.S. senators. The other 4 were Democrats. They had gone too far in helping Mr. Keating try to avoid his fate, which he had cheated. He'd closed out this savings and loan. But the head of Senate Investigation Committee of the Ethics, David Pryor, was on it. They came out with a report in the end that kind of censured McCain and the other 4, saying that this is that they went too far, and they gave him a little upbraiding, a slap on the wrist. But McCain bitterly resented that. David Pryor was on that committee, and he, from that point forward in 1992 until David Pryor left office in '97, he never spoke to him, ignored him on the floor of the Senate in the elevator. Until the last day David Pryor was cleaning out his desk, he looks over and sees this figure coming toward him. It's John McCain, and he wonders whether he's going to beat me up here on the last day. McCain came over, grabbed him, hugged him, and cried and said, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." And then after that, of course, he announced what a terrible thing he had done with the Keating 5 thing, and became a great champion of campaign finance reform as a result of it. That's kind of typical John McCain. I think that's the story of his greatness, I think.
Guys, thanks for coming in. We appreciate it. And a quick program note, come October 5th, a major change in your life. Arkansas Week moves to 6:30. That's Friday, October 5th. We'll see you next week.
Local broadcast of Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the award-winning Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, Arkansas's largest major newspaper, bringing you local, national, and international news since 1819. By the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.